Hi, I'm Lyndon Story, and the presentation you're about to see explains why we need a more human-hearted modernity. But before I start the main presentation, what, in a nutshell, is the problem with modernity and what is a human-hearted approach? The key problem for modernity is that it uses reason to undermine tradition and religion, but only offers market values and competitive individualism as their replacement. This creates a life that many people find insecure, lacking in meaning, and lacking in community. Many movements in conflict with modernity, movements like revived religion and hyper-nationalism, in a sense offer to fill this lack of meaning. But sadly, some of the worst wars of recent history have been the result of challenges from modernity's opponents. The challenge of fascism in World War II, more recently of Islamic fundamentalism, and soon, I fear, it may be the challenge of resurgent nationalism. The best response to the failures of modernity isn't to join one of its opponents, but to join in building a more human-hearted modernity, one focused on happiness and fulfilment rather than market forces and hyper-individualism. Science confirms that we are not the calculating financial machines modernity presupposes, but flesh and blood beings with a social nature. Realising our social potentials, such as those for love, compassion, and friendship, is crucial to leading a fulfilling life. I call this understanding a human-hearted one, as it depends, metaphorically, as much on the heart as on the head. We need to join in building a more human-hearted modernity now. I'll start the main presentation with the question of what is modernity and what are its problems? For hundreds of years now, societies around the world have been slowly transforming from ones based on tradition and religion to ones based more on science, reason, and respect for human autonomy. Many people have noticed this process, of course, and it has many names. The most common name is modernity, so that's the term I'll be using to describe it. In particular, I'm using the word modernity to mean the process driven by science and reason of interrogating tradition and building societies focused on well-being, democracy, human rights, and individual autonomy. This captures both modernity's critical side, its focus on rational critique of existing institutions, and some sense of what it builds. There's plenty of positives associated with modernity, like democracy, human rights, an increase in material wealth, and so on. But modernity also creates problems. Existential emptiness is a key problem of modernity. Modernity's relentless process of rational critique undermines traditional social values and religion. But it does not support a clear replacement system of values and creates so much doubt in people's mind that many people, even if they do become financially comfortable, feel unhappy and unfulfilled and feel a sort of emptiness or nihilistic despair. This general feeling has been noticed by many people and given many names like anomie, alienation, or meaning crisis. It's also been noted by some that as modernity and material wealth increase, mental health problems like depression and anxiety also increase. I'm not trying to pick any one of these analyses and prioritise it. Instead, I'm using existential emptiness as a general term to describe the unfulfilling nature of life in modernity. Now, there are other problems in modernity that are problems in their own right, but also compound its existential emptiness. Firstly, identity crisis. Social status and roles in traditional societies were usually decided by birth. If you're born a peasant, that's what you'd grow up to be. If an aristocrat, and so on. Modernity emancipates people to find and develop their own identity. It's one of its greatest achievements. But this great emancipatory achievement also comes with the risk of people failing to realise their identity goals. For example, failing to become a film star or a millionaire or a successful lawyer or accountant. Also, there is the risk of society not appropriately recognising the identity someone develops. There is perpetual insecurity as identities have to be established and fought for on a constant basis. The insecure Instagrammer constantly checking their profiles' likes for validation is not anomalous, but an inevitable outcome of modernity. For many, the insecure sense of identity only intensifies the existential emptiness of modernity. Morality undermined. Modernity's rational critique has removed the commands of God as the foundation for morality. But modernity's critique has destroyed, Modernity's critique has destroyed every other foundation for moral commands, and reason by itself has not and cannot provide an alternative justification for moral commands. The sense of ethical rules as an option only is another factor which intensifies many people's feelings of existential emptiness in modernity. Constant change and transformation leading to insecurity. As we all know, constant change is a feature of modernity. Employment is more insecure and precarious than before. Whole industries can disappear. Everything changes. Yesterday's television superstar is replaced by today's TikToker. Of course, many people ride the wave of change successfully, but for many, it simply adds to the sense of insecurity of living in modernity. All three of these issues are significant problems for modernity in their own right, and all add to existential emptiness by increasing the feeling of insecurity and aimlessness in modernity. Now, let me hold on for a moment. Modernity does offer answers for existential emptiness. It's just that they don't work and often make things worse. Modernity does have a view of human nature and seeks to satisfy humans in accordance with that view. In a nutshell, modernity is based on the idea that human rationality is paramount. But pure rationalism fails as a vision of human nature. We are not purely rational creatures, as researched by many writers, such as Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow, or Antonio Damasio in Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason, and the Human Brain show. Nowhere on earth has the decline of traditional societies led to a society in which people engage only in calm, rational deliberation of all things. Our rationality is a crucial part of our humanity, but it is not all that there is to being a human being. From the Romantic movements onwards, it's been clear that feelings and emotions play a role in human happiness, and a life based purely on reason is an arid and sterile vision. Of course, the rational model has developed over time. The most influential version of it today is the idea that we are all Homo economicus, creatures who engage only in rationally calculated behaviour so as to maximise our economic benefit, and that doing so is the key to human happiness and fulfilment. But this ignores the evidence that humans are not solely rational. It ignores the evidence that wealth beyond a basic threshold does not increase happiness, and the evidence that positive social interactions do lead to happiness and fulfilment. The Homo economicus model has helped underpin economic growth that has benefited many people, but it is quite simply incorrect as a model of human personality. Blindly following it still leaves many people unhappy and unfulfilled. Responding to people's unhappiness by doubling down on material wealth as a path to happiness and fulfillment only intensifies the sense of existential emptiness that many people feel as they see market values being elevated above human values. There are other important problems of the market system, such as economic inequality, precarious employment, the environmental damage and the climate change that occurs as a consequence of prioritising economic growth above all other values. These are all serious and important problems in their own right. What I'm talking about, however, is whether modernity's model could ever work to enable happy and fulfilled lives. And even if all these other problems were solved, the combination of the destruction of values and the inadequacy of material wealth by itself to bring fulfillment mean that the issues of the existential emptiness of modernity would remain. Modernity is, in this respect, a self-defeating system. Modernity's other major answer to the question of meaning is hyper-individualism. Be yourself, no matter what. The problems with this approach are obvious. What if being yourself means dominating and controlling others? Hyper-individualism by itself creates a culture where there can only be winners and losers, and intensifies people's sense of social isolation and existential emptiness. Three key issues emerge from this. Firstly, modernity is self-defeating. No amount of wealth by itself will bring happiness and fulfillment. Modernity's view of human nature is too narrow, and this stops it developing societies that fully support human happiness and fulfillment. Secondly, the unhappiness caused by existential emptiness needs to be addressed. Mental health concerns like depression and anxiety appear to be rising in tandem with modernity. The sheer unhappiness that many people face in modern society is worthy of being addressed in its own right. Thirdly, there are the dangerous ideologies that feed off existential emptiness. Some ideologies or individuals offer a sense of community and purpose as a reward for rejecting rationalist modernity. Fascism, nationalism, religious fundamentalism, and other ideologies have offered people a sense of connection with something allegedly higher and more important than the human individual, and given people a sense of community and connection in that way. This may be all very well when it is just an abstract idea, but as soon as people feel there is a threat to whatever ideology is holding their existential emptiness at bay, there is a problem. Protecting the ideology becomes crucial to a person's sense of happiness and security, and the ideology is more important than any individual, so it becomes easy to justify killing and warfare in the name of the ideology. This is the threat we all face from the existential emptiness of modernity. I'm going to explain this last danger a bit more. Firstly, to the issue of ideologies, idols, and strongmen as solutions to existential emptiness. People can get a sense of meaning and connection from a feeling of association with something longer lasting and seemingly more powerful than our fragile individual humanity, like a god, a nation, an ideology, or a strongman. This gives a feeling of some overarching value system back in place and a platform from which to criticise the cruelty and emptiness of modernity's global marketplace and rejection of values. This sort of approach leads to statements like, the global economic system violates God's rules. It's unfair to the people of our nation. Only our strong leader can protect us from its unfairness, and so on. But such idols are more easily threatened and more easily can justify force in their defence. More easily threatened as they are usually creations of the human mind. Nations only exist because we believe in them. They have no genetic basis. Strong men are only strong because their followers surrender their agency to them, and so on. And more easily justify force as the idol is seen as higher than our fellow human beings. For example, such statements as kill for the nation, for God, for the leader, and so on. Consequently, the emptiness of modernity generates a series of dangerous ideologies in response, from fascism to nationalism to religious fundamentalism. From the challenge of fascism in World War II to the challenge of Islamic fundamentalism in the so-called war on terror, to today's risk of a return of nationalist-inspired warfare. Addressing the problems of modernity is not a mere abstract intellectual question. It is a vital task if we are to bring an end to the constant series of ferocious wars between modernity and its enemies, or at the very least, head off the next terrible conflict. If we do nothing to address the problems of modernity, we continue with the problems of a self-defeating system, which also creates unhappiness and existential emptiness. We also risk the continual generation of anti-modernist approaches like nationalism, religion, and strongman worship, whose promises to cure modernity's ills too often lead to persecution and warfare. We in fact risk a nightmare of new cruel ideologies and/or idols that build oppressive societies and trigger a new series of global conflicts. The best approach is not to reject modernity, but to choose a human-hearted way between the two extremes of modernity and its opponents. We can best address the failures of modernity not by joining one of its anti-rational opponents, but by joining in building a more human-hearted modernity. So I should say a little bit more about the basic meaning of human-heartedness. I'm using human-heartedness as an umbrella term for approaches that see humans as social beings for whom building positive social relations and connections with others is a key path to happiness and personal fulfilment. I've chosen to name these approaches human-hearted because pro-social qualities such as sympathy, compassion, and love come from our human potential. I call this understanding a human-hearted one, as it depends, metaphorically, as much on the heart as on the head, and is consistent with common English usage. For example, in expressions like have a heart or she is kind-hearted. Many famous earlier thinkers expressed human-hearted ideas. For example, Mencius, Hume, and Darwin. And there is a resurgence of human-hearted understanding today being driven by research in several branches of contemporary science as it confirms a human-hearted understanding. The goal is to build on our scientific knowledge to develop a more human-hearted modernity which actually meets human needs for happiness and fulfilment, rather than to persist with a cold and empty rationalism. Let's have a look at some early thinkers on human-heartedness and then move on to more recent research. First, some words from Mencius, who lived during the Warring States period of ancient China, and who was renowned as second only to Confucius in the Confucian canon of thinkers. Now, I shall quote the Mencius statement there. Here is why I say that all human beings have a mind that commiserates with others. Now, if anyone were suddenly to see a child about to fall into a well, his mind would always be filled with alarm, distress, pity, and compassion. That he would react accordingly is not because he would use the opportunity to ingratiate himself with the child's parents, nor because he would seek commendation from neighbours and friends, nor because he would hate the adverse reputation. From this it may be seen that one who lacks a mind that feels pity and compassion would not be human. The mind's feeling of pity and compassion is the beginning of humaneness. Clearly, Mencius saw that we had a potential for sympathy and compassion. He saw it as not a guaranteed behaviour, but a potential. That's why, in this translation, it's called a beginning. He sees it as part of our innate human potential, our humaneness, something we could all have access to, rather than something which depended on an external source, like a God, patriotism, or a command of reason. And he provided arguments like this one to justify his position, using analogies and examples which he hoped would be clear to people. Many other thinkers in East and West made similar observations to Mencius. Eventually we find Charles Darwin, the great evolutionary scientist, saying, "Any animal, whatever endowed with well-marked social instincts, would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as soon as its intellectual powers had become as well developed, or nearly as well developed, as in man. As man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all the members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being once reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to men of all nations and races." Clearly, the social instinct Darwin saw was something very similar to Mencius' mind that commiserates with others. It is a part of our humanity. Darwin saw it as something which would be coupled with rational education to develop guiding principles, and as something which evolution selected for. Earlier thinkers like Mencius made strong arguments. With Darwin, we start seeing scientific arguments that confirm human heartedness. The basic concept that we are social beings and achieve happiness and fulfilment through building positive social relations with others has been investigated and confirmed by numerous scientific studies. In a nutshell, we can say that in relation to evolution, cooperation and pro-social behaviour have played important roles in human evolution generally and in building human societies. We have evolved as social beings. In relation to neuroscience, it confirms that pro-social behaviour, such as acts of kindness, can trigger the brain's reward centres and trigger the release of so-called feel-good chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine. Being fulfilled through good relationships is a fact of human life. Recent research in psychology and other fields has provided numerous confirming examples for this trend. In fact, so much has been published on this in recent years that there are too many examples for me to choose from. Some examples of recent books that summarise scientific research on the question of either the limitations of our rational capacities and or the role of sympathy, compassion and positive sociality in human happiness and fulfilment include the 5 works that I've listed below there. The Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, describes how our mental processes are not always purely rational. The Damasio book also focuses on the role of emotions in decision-making. The last 3 books by Keltner, Churchland and Haidt all contain strong attacks on rationalism as a vision of human nature and as an ethical system. Each set out research supporting alternatives based more on our intuition and emotions, while still retaining a role for reason, but each with a focus on different areas. Research related to happiness, compassion and altruism is regularly posted online by institutions such as the Greater Good Science Centre at the University of California, Berkeley. What I would like to do is draw out some key themes of the human-hearted revival we are seeing and explain how they can help us in addressing the problems of modernity. Several key principles emerged from both the human-hearted tradition and its contemporary scientific resurgence, I should say. The 5 key principles I propose focusing on as human-hearted guidelines are: 1. Humans are social creatures. We have evolved as social creatures able to build positive relations with others. 2. Fulfilment comes in significant part from realising our social potentials. Building positive social relations with others through behaviour based on realising pro-social potentials, such as sympathy, friendship and love, is a surer path to fulfilment and happiness than competitive individualism. This is not to say we don't have individual characteristics. We do, and developing them is part of developing a happy and meaningful life. But our individuality is better developed, as much as possible, in a positive social context rather than a purely competitive one. 3, self-realization or self-actualization is a social rather than individualistic project. From a human-hearted perspective, self-actualization is not simply an individualistic project, but a social one, which also involves realizing our social potentials by building personal and positive pro-social relations with others. Human-heartedness does not reject the goal of self-actualization, it turns it into a social project. More individualist aspects of this project for any individual can be developed on a platform of positive social connections and orientations. 4, ethics is based on flourishing rather than perfect rules or commands. Neither God nor reason has been able to establish an infallible foundation for ethics. Human-heartedness accepts we cannot establish ethical principles with certainty. It looks to the realities of our existence, what leads to a flourishing of the self and others, as both a broad goal and as a field of empirical investigation. As well, human-heartedness sees a strong role for sympathy and compassion in helping develop our ethical insights. 5, living with uncertainty. A human-hearted approach accepts that with the decline of gods and tradition, we now live in a social world without certainties. Living in this world as we must, we can only do the best we can. By imposing a bogus certainty on social life, we risk making the perfect the enemy of the good. Instead of an endless search for external idols, we need to be courageous enough to accept that we can live with uncertainty and make the best of what we do have, our human social potential. So, bearing these 5 principles in mind, what would a human-hearted modernity look like? And how would it help address the problems that we identified earlier in modernity? How would an individual go about living a life more inspired by human-heartedness? In daily life, building good relations with others is better for happiness than competitive individualism. Self-realization would occur in a significant part through behaviours realising pro-social potentials in daily life, such as building friendships and helping others. More individualistic actions, such as pursuing individual interest, could still be built on a pro-social platform. Ethics. Ethics would be based on promoting flourishing for all, as I discussed before. A human-hearted ethics would also be driven by sympathy and compassion, looking to steadily extend recognition and dignity to all life forms. Reason would play a crucial role in developing guidelines building on sympathy and compassion. Most significantly, an ethics based on flourishing could become part of a person's daily actions and social relations as people work to support their own and others' best potential. Identity. Building a sense of identity is a positive part of modernity. We all have multiple identities: national, local, friend, occupational, parent, child, etc. Human-hearted approaches respect that among these we all share a common human identity. A human-hearted approach to identity involves respecting our shared human identity at the same time as developing other forms of identity, and not allowing these other identities to blind us to our common humanity. Existential emptiness. By focusing on flourishing, positive sociality, and self-realization through building good relations with others, human-heartedness offers an antidote to existential emptiness. People can become connected with something broader than themselves, not with an idol or ideology, but with positive and fulfilling relationships with other human beings. And they can continue to explore and develop their individuality as well in the context of a positive framework of relationships rather than in a hyper-individualised battle of all against all. In this way, we can all start to address the existential emptiness of modernity. What would a human-hearted modernity look like? Part 2. If we move beyond human-heartedness as a practice that people can pursue in their daily lives and consider what sort of system effects a more human-hearted approach might inspire and support, what sort of picture do we see? politics and economics. A human-hearted politics would have to be based on respecting the basic dignity of all people for upholding democracy and human rights. Our humanity is in effect the source of meaning in a human-hearted approach, and all humans must receive basic respect. As human-heartedness involves a fuller picture of human beings and what makes for a fulfilling life, a human-hearted politics would also put the basic welfare of all before market priorities, as its focus would be on ensuring everyone has the basic opportunity to flourish. This would mean ensuring that access to the necessities of life, such as housing, food, and medical care, should be ensured for all. It would not oppose economic growth, but want to ensure that economic growth benefited all, in particular the most needy. Likewise, ensuring access to cultural goods like education would be equally important for a politics based on promoting the opportunity to flourish. Climate change. A human-hearted approach helps lay some of the groundwork for addressing climate change by promoting a culture that is not solely focused on perpetual economic growth, and by emphasising that happiness and fulfilment do not come from material wealth alone. A human-hearted approach would also emphasise our common humanity more than national differences, and so help build the sense of common community we need to work together to develop to address climate change. Global politics generally. In this respect, a human-hearted approach generally is more globalist than nationalist, focusing on the welfare of all human beings rather than dividing them into competing nation-states. It would encourage a move from our system of competing nation-states to a more globally oriented human political system, a human union. Beyond humans, the sympathy and compassion that drives a human-hearted ethics is capable of extending to non-human beings. A human-hearted ethic would eventually extend as much as possible to caring for the flourishing of all living beings. In summary, then, we can see that a human-hearted approach will be a key to addressing existential emptiness in daily life and in addressing the problems of ethics, identity, climate change, and global conflict that come with modernity. Building a human-hearted modernity is not an abstract goal, it is a crucial task which we must begin now. In summary, then, human-heartedness addresses the self-defeating nature of modernity by providing a path to fulfilment and happiness that addresses existential emptiness, and by providing an alternative framework for approaching the problems of ethics, identity, climate change, and politics that modernity creates. A framework based on the flourishing of our actual human sociality, not on an attempt to place an ideology, God, or marketplace above humanity. Building a human-hearted modernity is a crucial task which we must begin now. It's something we can succeed in because all it depends on is our own humanity. Please be open to the best of your humanity and help build a more human-hearted modernity. So what comes next? More information can be found in my article, A Human-Hearted Modernity, which is published in Aereo magazine. Simply Google Linden Story, Human-Hearted Modernity, or Aereo magazine, and the article should come up in the search results. And of course, I'm developing this video channel to explore and consider various aspects of a human-hearted modernity. So please subscribe to this video channel to see more videos. The Human-Hearted Modernity project, however, is one that is focused on making actual change. So if you are interested, please consider forming or joining a human-hearted influenced community group. I'll be posting more about forming communities of people trying to support each other to live in a more human-hearted way at a later date. For now, I'll simply say it's a project I hope to start sometime in 2023. The only way we can make real change is if we each decide to try to live in a more human-hearted way. So I'm asking people listening to be more open. I'll say that again. So I'm asking people listening to be more open to human-heartedness in your life. In terms of living a life inspired by human-heartedness, I'm far from a perfect example of human-heartedness myself. Yet, trying to practice human-heartedness in my life has led to me building better relationships, having more fulfilling experiences, and generally enjoying life far more than before. So, as well as making the general argument for policies based on human-heartedness, I'm making a point about personal experience too. Trying to practice human-heartedness has been good for me in a way no other philosophy or theory has been. We only have one life, and we live in a world where both modernity and its opponents pose increasing risks to human and planetary welfare. So I'm urging people to choose for human-heartedness as a guide, a personally fulfilling and intellectually defensible guide in facing the challenges that we and our world face today, and to help start building a more human-hearted modernity.